I'll just make a note that attendees are muted in this WebEx event, but please use the chat function for any questions that come up. And maybe you can even spell better than I can at a workshop series, spelling in the chat function. We definitely want to be interactive here. So if you hear something that you have a question about or you'd like to add something to, feel free to put that in the chat box. And between the three presenters today, I think we'll be able to spot that question and get that answered. We're going to shoot for about an hour or so of material here, but then leave plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. So just hang in with us, and I hope everybody's questions get answered. So just a few tips. WebEx, most of us have been living and breathing it for a little while now, but if this is a new platform for you, I wanted just to make sure to remind you that you have some control buttons that are little circles, and they're at the bottom of your screen. Once you go away from them, they may disappear so that your screen is uncluttered. All you've got to do is just hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen and then it will reappear. And that includes things like the chat bubble. So where you see that little talking bubble, that's the one that will help you use that, that chat feature. Oh, and I don't think we have anyone connecting by telephone, but we do have a email address available if anyone would like to email questions about the series. You can email us at clearingair@louisvilleky.gov, and you can always reach the Air Pollution Control District at air@louisvilleky.gov. We like to make it pretty simple for folks. So just a little bit about why we're doing this workshop. We are seeking to improve our engagement with the community, and by helping people understand what our role as an agency and part of local government is here in improving Louisville air quality. By doing that, we hope that we are empowering our community with information, both to understand the function of the district and our regulations and our programs in air quality, but also to better understand air quality and its impact on our health as individuals and what we can do about that to both reduce our exposure and reduce our emissions and our individual contributions. We also hope that this is a comfortable setting, that people feel like they can ask questions and have a discussion and with the district and with our staff here about these topics, and you know, any of those air quality related questions that you might have. So this is not a board meeting. This is not an official regulatory setting here. This is just what it is. It's a workshop. We're here to figure it out together. So part of that is also to build some relationships and look at this is a place that people can keep checking back in with us and kind of begin to build that bridge with the agency and us with our stakeholders. Specifically today, we're here to talk about ground level ozone and the impact it has on public health. We will be reviewing the current National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS. We'll hear NAAQS a lot in just about any conversation you have with someone from APCD, but especially this evening. So that's the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ground level ozone here in Louisville. And then we're going to talk some about what efforts are being done to develop strategies to reduce ozone, and also to find some strategies that have other kinds of co-benefits, reducing other pollutants and other environmental benefits to those strategies. So just to remind everybody, there is no silly question tonight. Tonight is all about people learning and having the opportunity to ask those questions. It's supposed to be an informal and interactive workshop, so feel free to raise your hand in the over in the participant list. If that's more comfortable to you, you can also again use that chat function to ask questions as they come to mind, and we'll get those answers. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two other speakers tonight. I'm Michelle Keene. I am the Director of Program Planning at the Air Pollution Control District, and I'm going to be trying to drive this bus. It's a new role for me. Our previous coordinator, Torrin Collins, who some of you all may have seen at previous workshops, was really good at this. And so I'm going to try to take a stab at driving this technology, while two of my colleagues from Air Pollution Control District do the heavy lifting has been presenting. Byron Gary first up, he is our regulatory coordinator at APCD. And then he'll be followed by Billy DeWitt, who is our air monitoring program manager, and a long-time APCD employee. And got just a wealth of knowledge here in the workshop. And I'll bring it back around at the end. So, Byron, I'm going to turn it on over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everybody for joining us. I am by no means an expert on the chemistry or meteorology or most of this, but have done a good bit of reading and learned about ozone myself over the past several years. So try and give an intro to what it is and what we know about it and what we need to know. Next slide. Next one. So everybody is familiar with the idea of the ozone layer and the problems there with it being depleted. That is good ozone, though, and that is way up in our stratosphere. It protects us from ultraviolet rays from the sun. But ozone, same compound, but down at ground level is what we call bad ozone. It's a colorless, really irritating gas, strong oxidizer, depending on the concentrations of it. And it forms right down at the Earth's surface, also the troposphere. It's a secondary pollutant, so it's not emitted directly by any source or by very, very, very small amount of sources. So most of the ozone we're concerned with is created secondarily, we say, through chemical reactions. Next slide. So just some of the health effects listed here. It is particularly hazardous for those with pre-existing conditions like those with asthma. Those who are young or elderly can also reduce their resistance to infections, particularly in their lungs. As I mentioned, it's an oxidizer, so it irritates the pathways and parts of our lungs that help us breathe. So if you exercise outdoors, that is going to, or work outdoors for that matter, it's going to be particularly irritating at higher levels if you're young or elderly or asthmatic. And it can also worsen other, besides just asthma, symptoms of COPD and chronic bronchitis. Next slide. It also has some environmental effects. That picture in the bottom right in particular, you can see those black spots are from oxidation from ozone. It can reduced crop yield is one of the ones that EPA focuses on the most because with their setting of the secondary NAAQS, the one that focuses on environmental effects, that's one of the most common effects or most easily measurable anyway. But it also has effects on species diversity and habitat quality, all sorts of things in nature. Next. So I mentioned that it's a secondary pollutant. It is not formed or not emitted directly. It is formed through reactions between NOx or nitrogen oxides or oxides of nitrogen and VOCs, volatile organic compounds. They react in sunlight and form ozone. Next slide. And those compounds come from a variety of different sources. They come from natural sources, including wildfires, as well as what we call biogenic sources, trees, that great pine smell in the summer. Those are all VOCs being emitted by plants. Area sources, which are just sort of smaller sources, everything from cleaning compounds used in your house to filling up at the gas station, as well as mobile sources. That includes both what we call on-road sources, like the truck and bus shown there, as well as non-road sources, airplanes flying way up overhead, or construction equipment, trains, that sort of thing, as well as stationary sources or point sources, those large factories, power plants, that sort of thing. And a large portion of it also is transported into our region from other areas. So the chemical reactions happen over it's a really rapidly evolving science, but happens a lot, but it moves into our area as well. Next slide. So there's two compounds, just a little bit more about them. Oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, are a family of highly poisonous reactive gases. mostly come from burning things. So everything from your lawnmower shown there to power plants and cars emit NOx, particularly diesel vehicles emit a higher amount, but every on-road source puts out NOx. These are one of the two, the other being volatile organic compounds. These are, like I said, there's things that you can smell usually, everything from pine forests to paint to gasoline. VOCs themselves are not a criteria pollutant. Some of them are regulated independently as hazardous air pollutants, but not all of them are. And those are as individual compounds, depending on whether they are toxic in and of themselves. So pretty much anything that you can smell is usually coming from a VOC. Next slide. So where it comes from in Jefferson County, both of them, as you can see, point sources are the largest sector of NOx emissions in Jefferson County, whereas non-point sources emit a much greater amount of VOCs. So on the point source side, that is primarily from large boilers, including those at power plants. On the non-point side, that includes in the national emissions inventory where this data came from biogenic sources, but a larger portion here in Jefferson County would be everything from print shops, solvents, bourbon aging, things like that. On-road sources also emit a significant amount of both NOx and VOCs in Jefferson County. Next slide. As for meteorology, that is also an important factor. That's that third part of the equation. The meteorology that really leads to ozone formation are hot, sunny days with stagnant or low winds in particular, so that those compounds have a lot of time to sit out in the sunlight and bake and form ozone. So really windy days, we actually kind of like here in Jefferson County. Really rainy, cloudy days, we actually kind of like at APCD. Not everybody likes them during the summer, but it does tend to reduce those level of ozones. And that ozone can sort of move, not exactly as a plume, but as a large mass that will move into the area. And depending on the winds, will just sort of get trapped here, particularly because we are in that valley that sort of traps it in the area. Next slide. So don't worry too much about figuring out the math in this equation, but basically NOx and VOCs plus sunlight form ozone, but it depends on how much VOC and how much NOx you have. So there's a certain ratio that is ideal for forming ozone. If you have too much NOx, then cutting NOx isn't really going to do a whole lot of good. Too much VOC, you're in a VOC limited. The top left, this is a really complicated way that the science journals often portray figuring out whether you're NOx or VOC limited. But next slide, how I sort of think about it is if you have a whole lot of VOCs, say from biogenic sources, and a little bit of NOx just from those anthropogenic or those human-made sources, then you can only form ozone up until that smaller circle of NOx is consumed. And then even if you start cutting those VOCs and shrinking that circle, you're not going to end up shrinking the amount of ozone until you get down to that sort of critical ratio between NOx and VOCs. So if you are in the situation portrayed by that graphic, you would be what we call NOx limited, where you're going to get a lot better bang for your buck as far as reducing ozone by cutting NOx. So next slide, here in Louisville, we've sort of had an open question. Most of the Southeast is pretty heavily NOx limited, just because in Southeast and the Eastern US in general, we have all these huge, great, wonderful forests, but they put out a lot of VOCs. So cutting those anthropogenic VOC sources, most of the Southeast does not cut ozone significantly. But it's been a bit of an open question because Louisville is both more urbanized and sort of on the edge of all those great, wonderful pine forests in the Southeast as to whether we are completely NOx limited. So we commissioned this ozone formation study last year to try to understand the regional drivers of ozone formation, to basically figure out whether we were NOx or VOC sensitive. The first step of that was to get a more comprehensive inventory. We sort of had to refine the modeling inventory a little bit, then do some really complex modeling. And the last step that we didn't get to because we determined it wasn't going to be as useful here was to try and figure out the reactivity, because not all VOCs are equal either. That next slide that Michelle just showed are the results of that study. The modeling area was much larger than this, but just to really zoom in and see what the effects were in Louisville. On the left, it was the NOx sensitivity case. So basically, we had the model run twice. On the left-hand side, where if we cut all anthropogenic NOx emissions within the area, how much reduction in ozone would we see? You can see there's a much greater reduction. The darker the blue, the greater the reduction. So there's a greater reduction from those cutting of NOx, but it's really the least right in that urban core. And that's also on the right-hand side where we see the greatest potential reduction from VOCs, from VOC reductions. So it's not as clear-cut as it is in most of the Southeast. We are sort of on that border where we can still get some reductions from VOCs as well, although, as you can see, NOx is going to be the much more effective way to reduce our ozone. Next slide. I think I pass it off to Billy at this point.
Okay, thanks, Byron. I'm going to talk about Louisville's ozone status. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. When we talk about our status, we're really looking at three things, and that's the standards, the air network, and the AQI. The EPA National Ambient Air Quality Standards come from the Clean Air Act, and that's what we really base our status against, is the levels set forth within these standards. They're defined by 40 CFR Part 50. That's just part of the Clean Air Act where they're defined. And the ambient air quality standards identify 6 principal pollutants, which we refer to as criteria air pollutants: carbon monoxide, lead, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, and ozone. This is a table that lists out those criteria pollutants along with the standard and the averaging time for each standard. Averaging times are based on the actual health studies that set forth the standard and how much of a effect a pollutant has over a period of time. You see the levels for each standard. That also is defined by the health studies. Some pollutants have multiple standards based on the studies, and others only have one. And that's based on how the pollutant affects the body and the resulting health consequences. For instance, particulate matter is based on exposure over 24 hours, while NO2 or SO2 is based on 1 hour exposure. Ozone, which is sort of our focus today, when you see the air quality index or an average that goes towards a design value for ozone, that is an 8-hour average, and it'll be the highest 8 hours for that particular day, for that 24-hour period. Next slide, thank you. This is our current status against the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. We're in attainment for every pollutant but ozone. We just received countywide attainment for sulfur dioxide, and ozone's really the one that's still hanging out there, that we have some work to do on that 8-hour standard of 70 parts per billion. Particulate matter has been somewhat of a concern over past years, but that continues to trend down quite well. Next slide. Here is the ozone trend, and as you can see, over many years, Louisville's trend has been decreasing, but it's not decreasing fast enough to match the standards. The standards are required to be reviewed every so many years by the EPA, and when that happens, sometimes the most current health studies show that that standard should be lowered. You see the 1997 standard was an 80 parts per billion. That was over an 8-hour average. The 2008 standard dropped to 75 parts per billion, and the 2015 standard dropped to 70 parts per billion. And that's what our measurements in the community are matched up against. And so although we're slowly moving downward in overall ozone, we're still above what the health studies show is in attainment area. Moving on to the actual measurement of our pollutants and ozone. This is a snapshot from our air monitoring network plan that shows the sites in Jefferson County and the Kentucky area within our metropolitan statistical area. And what this one doesn't show actually is there are 3 sites in southern Indiana that also contribute data within our metropolitan statistical area, and the data from all these sites go into the numbers to average our design values, which are compared to the ambient air quality standards. Each of these sites are strategically located and very scientifically assessed to provide the full determination of Louisville's air quality. And so they're carefully cited when using federal regulation and what we know about our local region to accurately assess the area. Okay, next slide. And then the air quality index is a way that we try to translate our measurements into a health message. And this is created to provide daily analysis and reporting of air quality in a uniform manner. And it's calculated for 4 criteria: pollutants, ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide. An AQ value of 100 corresponds to the NAAQS, meaning that standard we saw in the table previously is right at 100 on the AQI scale, where the levels go from moderate to unhealthy for sensitive groups. Below 100 is deemed to be satisfactory. These are the way the scale is broken down for the air quality index. Again, this is standardized for every area in the country. Depending on your pollutant, it is scaled to the air quality index. 0 to 50, that's roughly halfway to the ambient air quality standard, and that is considered good air. From halfway up to the standard is moderate, and that's still considered satisfactory air, but they do say for unusually sensitive people, they should consider reducing prolonged or heavy exertion. The good and moderate are by far the 2 categories where Louisville's air generally falls each day. This time of year, it's really determined by particulate matter. We're at the very tail end of ozone season, and so for the remainder of fall and through the winter, we'll see a lot of moderate numbers based on particulate matter, where the ozone will be good. In the ozone season during the summer, that's when it starts to take over, and you'll see more moderate days from ozone, and occasionally it will go into that unhealthy for sensitive groups area. And this is a good representation right here of how it works on that ozone season. During the winter months, all good days. We see moderates during the summertime, and in the midst of summer, we get really stagnant meteorology. That's when we see days that creep over the standard and go into unhealthy for sensitive groups. Again, that's not very many days, but we do have a few in the summer, and that's what we're working to try to pull down.
Okay, Billy, I'm going to try to give you control if that works for you. That looks great.
All right. This is current Louisville Air Watch page, which is the website that we've been working to develop to give air quality information to the local population. This gives Louisville's air quality index and a lot of information about current readings of our pollutants. Right now, you see the top pollutant is PM 2.5 with an air quality index of 33 in the good range. And what that means is that is the representation of the monitor with the highest air quality index currently in the MSA network. So it's currently particulate matter, as it is oftentimes this time of year. I want to scroll down a little bit. I'll show you. We also have a map available that shows you the AQI, the top AQI for particulate matter, or whatever the determining pollutant is for the AQI. If the highest is ozone, this would be a map showing the ozone sites. But right now it's showing 5 particulate matter sites. Those sites in blue are not measuring particulate matter, but those within Jefferson County are, and their various highest particulate matter air quality index. Further down, there's several areas where you can get more information, especially about the individual pollutants. There's a good synopsis of each pollutant that we give information on within this website. And then there's an AQI history down below, and that's showing the past 30 days of the air quality index compared with a month ago. And you see that we've been staying below that 50 range, largely in the good category for the last 30 days. I'll show you quickly around the site here. You can use the top area tab to go to individual stations. Here is the station Cannons Lane site. It will show you the top pollutant there, also particulate matter with an AQI of 30. There's a Cannons Lane pollutant breakdown that will show you those pollutants that are measured by the air quality index and their current levels. Gives you some meta information about the site. And then it goes into the hourly values for everything we measure there. And it's quite a few things there at Cannons Lane, including a lot of research grade instruments, and it provides us with a lot of background information for ozone. And this is a site where later this year we'll be adding some instrumentation to measure VOCs that will give us measurements for precursors of ozone, and give us even more information of the kind of things that are going into our ozone picture in the Louisville region. Speaking of measuring VOCs, we do currently have a station that in West Louisville that's measuring VOCs. It was originally cited to measure SO2 from power plant across the river, but over the years it's developed into a robust site that measures particulate matter, various meteorological parameters, and of course we've gotten air toxics of late. And here is the tab that shows the current air toxics, and we're only showing a few right now because the nature of this new technology is such that instantaneous data has to be assessed to see how accurate it is, and these are VOCs that we feel very comfortable with reporting straight out of as soon as the measurement cycle has ended. We are increasing quality assurance standards at the site and in implementing more checks to increase and expand this list, hopefully in the near future. So we have 3 now. Look for that to expand as we develop the program, and really our air monitoring chemist is leading the way in developing this new technology, has done a great deal of work in moving forward on really near real-time VOC measurements, as compared to the past where it would take 24-hour measurements, once every 6 or 12 days. All right, I think at that point I will give it back to you, Michelle.
Okay. And now I've got to figure out how to get that back. Bear with me just a second, folks. I gotta go figure out how to take control back from Billy now. Billy, in yours, do you have an assigned privileges? For me, it was on the control panel when I was sharing my screen at the very top.
I've you as host, and I don't see that I have any privileges.
Okay. This is a new one. Okay, I figured it out. Sorry about that, folks. We're gonna get back into our presentation. You're still up, Billy.
This is just a slide from the AirNow site. We looked at it on a granular level. Louisville Air Watch really focuses on our metropolitan statistical area. And AirNow is a really nice site to show nationwide what the air quality is, and you can drill down on that site and look at regional levels, including Louisville area. So it provides a wealth of information about the air quality index and many other topics, and it's a really good site. Louisville Air Watch is just really an addition to this to show more detail for our local air quality. All right, we can move on from there. I think that's it for me.
I think we're going to go back to Byron for a little bit more on what's next.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Billy. I thought you were done with me. Billy showed a slide of where we were. I'm going to talk a little bit about what comes next. This is the same slide from earlier showing our current status as he described. That standard dropped in 2015 to 70 parts per billion. We are still out of compliance with that standard. Our design value in 2017 through 2019 being, I think, 72 parts per billion. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Billy. But next slide. What this means for us, in 2018, we were designated non-attainment by EPA, marginal non-attainment to start, which kicked in a few different requirements for us. The first was the next year we had to start doing transportation and general conformity. This basically means that we have to make sure that nothing that federal funds are supporting or being spent on could interfere with or prevent us from attaining that NAAQS. This year, we had to submit an emissions inventory and emissions statement rule. We had to basically go through the NEI and update some of the national emissions inventory to show what our inventory was that got us to non-attainment. We also had to submit a certification that our rule requiring certain sources to report their annual emissions to us was sufficient. We had to lower the threshold a little bit for what sources had to report to us annually, those NOx and VOC emissions. And then next year, we have to submit a non-attainment new source review rule, as well as that's when our attainment deadline is next August. Next slide. Unfortunately, at the time that attainment deadline occurs in August of 2021, we will still be in the middle of next year's ozone season. So EPA is required to make a determination of whether we met attainment or not based on the most recent complete 3-year data sets. That would be 2018 through 2020. And this ozone season, unfortunately, so far we have had 4 exceedances. So that 4th maximum is still above, and our 3-year average, once again, right at 72 parts per billion for 2018 through 2020. Which means by operation of the Clean Air Act, there's unfortunately not a whole lot of discretion in it the way we understand it. EPA, within 6 months of that deadline next year, will have to mandatorily reclassify us to moderate. But hopefully, if we have a better year next year, we will be already well on our way to attainment. If we were to be reclassified to that next higher classification of moderate non-attainment, a whole bunch of other requirements kick in. Within 2 years of that reclassification, we are required to submit a plan for implementing reasonably available control technology. This is whatever it takes to get us into attainment by the next attainment deadline, basically. Also, when EPA reclassifies us, they will set a deadline for us to submit an attainment plan. Part of that is that racked SIP, but we also have to demonstrate through more modeling like that I showed earlier that whatever we have chosen as racked is going to get us into attainment by that deadline. That's what that attainment demonstration is. EPA will also set deadlines for vehicle inspection and maintenance plan. We will have to submit something to EPA certifying that we are going to bring back into place that, unfortunately. However, as I stated, we've talked to EPA. We're already in the planning stages. If we're right on that borderline now, if we manage to get into attainment before that VET SIP and implementation of the VET is due, we may be able to still avoid that, but we're right on that borderline. The next attainment deadline, unfortunately, just because we started off as marginal, we don't get any extra time. That attainment deadline is still August 3rd, 2024, just like those areas that were designated moderate to start with in 2018. In addition, anytime an area is designated non-attainment, the requirements go on well after that. Even assuming we make that August 2024 deadline to make it into attainment, we will have to submit a maintenance plan that shows that we are going to maintain attainment for 10 years out after that. And then we're going to have to submit a second maintenance plan 10 years after that, showing that for another 10 years, we will stay in attainment. So we're going to be dealing with this ozone standard that's currently giving us trouble, at least until 2044. So there's a long range of planning that goes into this. And just extending out that tail end of that previous graph, EPA has done comprehensive nationwide modeling showing that certain areas will or will not attain by certain dates as part of a more nationwide plan called the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule, as well as some modeling related to regional haze. And they've modeled and they modeled just in 2023 and again further out. But in 2023, they showed that our area would reach attainment just barely. As you can see, that line bounces up and down depending on whether we have a good year or bad year. So that's certainly not a guarantee. But they modeled us right at that 70 parts per billion in 2023. And unfortunately, that is not in time to meet our current deadline. So another indication that we might not quite make it there. Next slide. And so I'll kick it back over to Michelle to talk a little bit about what we're doing to try and make the next deadlines.
All right, thanks, Byron. Thanks, Billy. I think it was very clear through those slides that ozone is a pretty complicated topic. Whether you're talking about the regulatory requirements around it, the type of air monitoring that we have to do, and certainly when you talk about the chemistry of how ozone forms. But there are things that we can do to be proactive about reducing ozone precursors, so that nitrogen oxides and those VOCs, in order to reduce ozone regionally. And we are actually, in fact, required to do many of those things. And among those would be things like the ozone formation study that Byron already talked about, just so we can learn more and be very strategic with our actions about how we reduce ozone. We have regulatory planning, that state implementation plan that Byron was just describing. Those kind of things happen at that high policy regulatory agency level. And so when we're talking about making big changes in air quality, I've been kind of borrowing from our friends in public health, and they talk about how to make big changes in big public health issues, because that's certainly what we're talking about when we talk about ozone. And they talk about the socio-ecological model, which is a hierarchy of society, and it's just a lot easier to say, levels of society. But that starts out with things that can be done at that very high governmental level, the regulations, policies, programs that the government puts in place, and those are things that are required in our planning. You go down through that socio-ecological model, those levels of society, it includes things like policy work and programs, things that businesses can do, so companies and large organizations within our community, and then into things that are like interpersonal for groups and organizations that we form in our community, all the way down to your individual choices and what we as individuals can do to choose to reduce air pollution, and then also things that we can do to reduce our exposure. So when we are aware of the air quality index, what choices can we make to make sure that we're protecting our own health as best we can? So when we talk about strategies to reduce air pollution, we like to think about them through all of those different levels. And so we talked a little bit about some of the regulatory work. The next thing I wanted to share with folks was the Multipollutant Stakeholder Group. APCD convened this group, but it was made up of stakeholders across our community. So that's everything from some of our very large regulatory regulated sources, those point and stationary sources that Byron described, things like our LMG, our power plants, some of the large manufacturers and Ford, we're all at the table. It also includes representatives from some of those groups around mobile sources. So we had folks from different fleets, the airport, JCPS, so people came to the table as well. And we also included members of our community that represent a lot of range of relevant stakeholders themselves. So health advocates, advocates for housing and healthy housing, which air quality has a big impact on. We also had neighborhood groups that are neighborhood advocates that were at the table. So we really wanted to have that broad range of voices. We also had several of our metro government peers, because we know that the types of activities that impact air quality aren't all just from our regulated sources or from the regulations that APCD implements, that there's a lot of other ways that we can improve air quality if we kind of broaden the scope of how we're looking at air quality. And that's what the Multipollutant Stakeholder Group did. This group broadly, we convened because we wanted to hear other ideas and recommendations, and we sort of crowdsourced those ideas here. So we wanted to look at how to reduce emissions. We were really focused on ozone, which is a multi-pollutant in and of itself, because we are looking at ozone as an endpoint, but we know that the VOCs and NOx are those initial emissions that we need to look at. But we also wanted to recognize that there are strategies to reduce ozone precursors that can help us reduce fine particulates, which, as Billy mentioned, we have had problems with attainment in the past, and we're doing really pretty good right now. We want to continue that downward trend of the levels that we're monitoring in the air. So what might we do that can help us reduce ozone and fine particulates? And definitely air toxics as well. Many of the ozone precursor VOCs that we're talking about are also air toxics. So there can be strategies that will help reduce both of those pollutants. We also wanted to talk about how we can reduce exposure and health risks, whether that be through individual actions and how we can use our programs to raise awareness of those, or how that might be done through these land use planning or transportation planning, and how people actually interact with the built environment around them. we kicked off this process in November. We had 36 different entities and organizations that were represented. So we had really good participation from our community. And we went through 3 long sessions with folks that really hung in there for a very detailed overview of air quality and what our goals were. We did a deep dive into ozone because we really needed to set the stage for this conversation. From there, we broke out into 5 different committees, and those committees represented the major source sectors, so point sources, area sources, those are those smaller sources, but there's lots of them all over the city, and mobile sources. And then we also had a committee to talk about health and health impacts and how to reduce those, as well as a committee to talk about outreach and education and what we can do to improve the knowledge and awareness of ozone and air quality in general across the city. Those committees had more than 60 participants. We had this fantastic participation at the committee level, and they stuck through with 37 different committee meetings. So we had a team of coordinators, and Byron was one of those, leading those committees through the conversation and helping them to develop recommendations for the district, and they developed more than 90 of them. It was an excellent process. In the course of that process, we built out a website with a lot of the resources that we shared with the stakeholders and with an emissions inventory dashboard. So that link is there on the slides, and I'll be sending these slides out to our attendees, and we'll post this presentation on our workshop webpage. But I encourage you also to visit the Multipollutant Stakeholder Group page and check out that emissions inventory dashboard. Byron built that for us. It's got 3 different years of national emissions inventory, 2011, 2014, and 2017 for our entire MSA area. So you can sort by different counties, by different source sectors, and it's a really helpful resource for understanding the emissions in our area. Out of that process, we produced a final report, and this report is substantial, to say the least. It really became more than just a report out of the process and the recommendations. It really became, as we started putting all the background information that we shared with our stakeholders into this report, it turned into really a great resource that covers Louisville's air quality, certainly as a current picture, but we also have some great information about how we got to the point where we are now. So there's a section that discusses each of the different criteria pollutants that we've been non-attainment for in the past. Thankfully, ozone is the only one that we are currently non-attainment for. We also talk about air toxics and the programs that have been put into place to help us reduce air toxics and reduce the health risks from them. So this report is on our website. It documents that whole process and those 90 recommendations, which we won't go through, but I did want to just highlight one example from each of those different committees. So some of the types of things that these committees came up with. The point source committee. So the district should encourage action by those point sources on their quality alert days so that they make some operational changes or encourage different behaviors from their employees. That they can help reduce emissions on those air quality alert days. So those are days when ozone or fine particulates are forecast to be above that 100 level of the AQI that Billy showed you. We typically put those forecasts out a couple of days in advance. And like the weather, sometimes we forecast mid-teens and it doesn't happen. That's a good story. That's what we'd rather see. We'd rather forecast one and let people prepare for it and maybe adjust their schedule and their activities for that day, and then not forecast one and have people surprised that air quality isn't as healthy as they wanted for their activities that day. So that's something that our point sources have came up with a recommendation to do and have those air quality alert day plans for their facilities. Those area sources, those small sources, talked about encouraging work practice changes or different types of technology or materials for their processes, and the district really leading with outreach and education. A lot of these sources are very small, they may be mom and pop shops. So they might not have all of the consulting and engineering and scientific expertise that some of our larger sources have in-house. So to the extent that we can do that, that's something that the district had recommended. And we have a small business compliance assistance program that is ready to help those smaller businesses learn about these opportunities. And where available, we'll find opportunities for financial assistance, that grant programs or investment opportunities for folks. The Mobile Source Committee had a lot to say about electric vehicles and how important they are to reaching our air quality goals and our sustainability goals as a city as well. Greenhouse gases weren't specifically discussed through the course of this process, but many of these recommendations overlap with the city's emission reduction plan for greenhouse gases that the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability has developed. So it just goes to show that there's really broad support for us taking these good steps. And the Mobile Source section had about 9 different recommendations about how we can expand that EV adoption, electric vehicle adoption, and the infrastructure that supports it. Our health committee, one of the things that they talked about was the idea that metro government should prioritize urban heat island mitigation strategies, because those strategies like planting trees and other types of vegetation have also been shown to improve air quality, whether that's through cooling our city and allowing us to use less energy, or through actually mitigating air pollution like fine particulates by buffering between sources like a highway and a neighborhood. So there's a lot of discussion of the Green Heart Project down at the University of Louisville, for example. And then our Outreach and Education Committee, they talked about how important it would be for our school kids here to have some local specific air quality information available in the science curriculum that teachers are incorporating into their classroom. So we're certainly looking for ways to do that. Our teachers, I think, that always use a hand at having more resources to engage with their students. And so if we can provide that local lens, that I think would be a great step. Some of the other initiatives that are outside of Air Pollution Control District or in partnership with us include the new Louisville multimodal plan. So again, we're talking a lot about mobile sources here because that could be a big ship to steer when you come to an entire community and how we get around. And the new Louisville plan really looked at how do people move around our city and not just how do vehicles move around our city. So it encouraged different types of mobility options. The Drive Clean Louisville team is a team within Metro government that APCD has been heading up along with our partners at the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability. And we're really trying to find ways to increase the amount of electric vehicles and clean fuels within Metro's operations and within our community at large. And one of those ways is just recently launched the Green Food Challenge, where we are challenging businesses and other entities within our community to go with us on this journey of electrifying our fleet. So we're asking them to match Metro government in the number or the proportion of electric vehicles in their fleets. And so we have one paper already. LG has signed on to be a partner in the Green Fleet Challenge. And so we're really excited about that. And we know that there are some additional companies out there interested, and we'll look forward to onboarding them and hoping just lead the way here in Louisville in increasing the amount of electric vehicles out there, the number of people driving them, whether you're an employee driving in the fleet or someone driving a personal vehicle. And just really normalizing the electrification of transportation. And then, of course, the Sustain Louisville plan. Sustain Louisville is a sustainability plan for across the city and includes greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Within that, the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability have also done a greenhouse gas inventory. They have a reduction plan, and they also have a climate adaptation plan. And within all of those plans, there are elements and strategies that speak directly to improving air quality and support ozone reduction specifically. So APCD has always tried to be a supporter of these other efforts because we understand how intertwined all of these other aspects of our city's operations and our community's infrastructure really are intertwined with air quality and meeting our air quality goals for our health. So some of the things that we can do as individuals, kind of moving down through those levels of society, we talked a lot about government and what businesses can do. Here's some things we can do as individuals or even as organizations. The Kentucky Air Education Program from the Air Pollution Control District has been for the last probably close to 20 years now, maybe not quite, but going on, trying to increase awareness throughout our city of the choices, the impact of our individual choices, particularly when it comes to our vehicles and how we get around our city. So one of the big push campaigns right now for the last couple of years has been the idle-free campaign. So hopefully everybody's heard of the idle-free campaign, count to 10, car off then. Basically, if you were going to be stopped and you're not in traffic for more than 10 seconds, it is better for air quality and for your pocketbook. You will use less gas and create less pollution if you just turn your car off and then restart when you're ready to go. So all those drive-throughs, car rider lines at school, and waiting in, for your spouse at the grocery store was a good time to turn off the car, and you're helping us probably a little bit easier. There's also a lot of transportation options outside of our vehicles. So the city's been working on making it safer for pedestrians, for cyclists, and also to access transit throughout our city. In your yard, at APCD, we encourage you to grow more, mow less, because lawnmowers create a lot of, gas-powered lawnmowers particularly, create a lot of pollution. So they create a lot of those VOCs and oxides of nitrogen. And while each one individually is small, there's a lot of mowing going on throughout our city. And when you consider how all that adds up, it makes a lot of sense to maybe not mow so much. So we encourage people to think about how they might be able to replace the grass in the yard. The grass that's not using you, or you're not using it, is actually using you to make you work sometimes. So what else could you plant there instead? Trees are a great way to grow more and mow less, and they have so many other cool benefits as well. So increase pollinator habitat, stormwater management, and just really create a beautiful space in your yard. We have a great Facebook page for this program. It's really more about just getting people thinking about how they use their yard. But for those who still remain with some grass in your yard, there's an option for you as well. The Lawn Care for Cleaner Air program has been providing rebates for 16 or so years now from the Air Pollution Control District. And we are encouraging people to trade in, where possible, a gas-powered mower. So we'll give people an extra rebate if you trade it in at a recycling center. And then you use that to double your rebate on an electric or human-powered lawn equipment. And that's mowers, string trimmers, and blower vacs. So, and we've got the more powerful equipment has a larger rebate too. So that's the Lawn Care for Cleaner Air Pro program. So the link there on your on that slide will take you to that program. You can learn all about where you can get, you can buy it anywhere and how you can get your rebate. But this can make a really big difference. And that little chart right there that shows you the scale of difference between emissions from a gas-powered lawnmower and emissions from electric. And a lot of people will say, but wait, APCD, we live in a region that is largely coal-fired power and almost completely fossil fuel powered. And you say, that's okay. This is still cleaner than your gas mower. So this is this chart actually shows you calculations for our area. So you can see how much cleaner it is to electrify. And electric equipment gets cleaner as our grid gets cleaner as well. So that's your car or your mower when you're thinking about electrification. And then again, in your home, we talked about VOCs and that large chunk of VOCs that are in our region that come from household and consumer products. So that can be everything from paints and solvents to cleaners and air fresheners. And what's really important to remember there is not only do they contribute overall to VOCs as a precursor emission to ozone formation, but they also degrade the air quality within your home and have air health impacts there that are even greater. So It's really important to be mindful of the VOCs that we're bringing in our home, and it's also important to be mindful of the air quality index so that we can see all those great green days when it would be a good idea to open your windows and let the air exchange in your house and have a little healthier indoor air quality while you're at it. Another way to improve air quality in your home through your home use of electricity. So being more energy efficient allows us to have a cleaner grid, and there's some great ways to do it. Everything from big investments like energy efficient appliances and the Energy Star program to small things like replacing light bulbs with LEDs, which have come down significantly in price in the last few years. And you're going to save money here as well. So as you can see, there is something across pretty much every level of our community that we can do to reduce ozone. And there's good reasons to do it. Those health impacts that we started at the beginning are really what it's all about at APCD. That health is the core of our mission, whether that's with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards or reducing risk from air toxics in our community. It really drives our work, and ozone is no exception to that. So I hope that everyone saw something today that they think that maybe they can do to improve air quality, or learned of something a little bit more about where ozone comes from and how it's formed here in Louisville. We do have a few more slides in this slide deck that we'll be sending out and also posting on our website. So if you want to go and check out some of these resources, that are things that we referred to throughout the presentation. Those hyperlinks are in there for your reference. We hope that that can be a resource for you. So just step back at that, and we're right at our hour of presentation. So let's see if anybody has any questions or comments to add in the chat. And, I don't think I'm seeing one on Byron or Billy. If you've seen any come through?
No, haven't seen any here in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay. Great. Just a second if anybody wants to add in, but I really appreciate folks joining us tonight. They're helping us kick off the second half of the 2020 Community Workshop Series. We'll be coming back in October with a presentation about odors in our community and how those are responded to, and how people can provide information to APCD in order to investigate those instances of odor in our community. Then in November, we'll be wrapping up the 2020 series with the workshop on environmental justice and air toxics here in Louisville. So that's a important topic that certainly one that we need to be more mindful, and throughout our community needs to have a better understanding of how our community is inequitably impacted with air pollution, and what we have and what we can still do to improve that. I hope that you'll join us then. And with no more in the chat, we'll call this one a close. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.